For 12 years, I built a life from the ashes of the one my family burned to the ground. I thought that chapter was closed. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, with the ocean breeze drifting through my window, they came back. Not with an apology, but with their hands out. This is the story of how I served justice, not on a silver platter, but from the boardroom of a life they tried to destroy. Settle in. My father, David, used to have this saying that he'd repeat like a mantra every time we built something together. I remember one specific Saturday. The Ohio sun was generous and warm on my 10-year-old shoulders, and the whole world smelled of freshly cut grass and potential. We were in the backyard, hunched over the pieces of a sleek, silver model rocket, the Odyssey 2000. It was a birthday gift. And to me, it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. His hands, large and calloused from his engineering work but impossibly gentle, would hover over mine, guiding me as I secured the delicate fins and packed the tiny engine. "Remember, Addie," he said, his voice a low, comforting rumble that always made me feel safe. "Aim for the stars. Always. But you can't get there without a strong foundation. It's what keeps you stable. It's what gives you the power for the initial push. Without it, you'll just spin out of control and burn up before you even leave the ground." We launched the Odyssey 2000 that day, and it soared in a perfect, breathtaking arc against a brilliant blue sky. For the first 12 years of my life, my foundation felt like it was carved from solid bedrock. It was the unwavering certainty of our little universe, him, my mom Eleanor, and me. Our cozy suburban house was a fortress of happiness, filled with the rich aroma of his dark roast coffee in the morning and the sound of her bright, unrestrained laughter in the evening. It was movie nights buried under a mountain of blankets, summer barbecues where the smoke always seemed to follow me no matter where I sat, and him patiently explaining the laws of physics as he helped me with my science projects. It was a life built not just on love, but on the absolute certainty of it. And then, the silence came. It didn't creep in, it crashed down. The day after the police officers left our front porch, a thick, suffocating blanket of silence fell over our house and smothered everything. The coffee pot stayed cold and clean on the counter. The laughter died, and its echo became a haunting presence in the hallways. My mother, a woman who used to fill every room with her energy, became a ghost. She'd drift from the sofa to the window and back again, her movements slow and aimless. At 12, I felt the terrifying weight of becoming the adult. I'd bring her glasses of water she'd forget to drink, toast that would grow cold and hard on the plate beside her. I'd talk, filling the crushing silence with chatter about my day at school, about my friends, about anything, just to feel a flicker of normalcy. But she'd just stare right through me, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance that only she could see, a place where I couldn't follow. The bedrock of my foundation had been pulverized into fine, gray dust. A year later, the invaders arrived. My mother married a man named Mark. He was a real estate developer with a smile that never reached his eyes and a handshake that felt less like a greeting and more like an assessment. His gaze would sweep across a room, lingering on a piece of furniture or a painting, and you could almost see the dollar signs calculating in his head. He looked at me the same way, and with him came his daughter, Jessica. At 18, she was already a master of the board. Condescending sigh. She carried herself with an air of entitlement that suggested the world was her personal department store, and she was just waiting for the staff, which now included me, to catch up. They moved into our house, and overnight, it was no longer ours. The very air changed, growing heavy and unfamiliar. The space I had known my entire life seemed to shrink, compressed by the weight of their presence. Mark's booming voice, usually barking into his phone about zoning permits or property lines, now dominated the soundscape. Jessica's cloying, expensive perfume seemed to cling to the curtains and the carpets, erasing the last faint traces of our old life. Simple things became demonstrations of power. If I was watching a show, Mark would walk in, take the remote, and change the channel without a word. And Jessica, in an act of silent conquest, took over my bedroom, the larger one with the big window overlooking the garden. There was no discussion. One day I came home from school to find my books, my clothes, my entire childhood packed into cardboard boxes and piled in the smallest room at the end of the hall. The one we used to call the guest room. The irony was a bitter pill. I was now the guest in my own home. The first declaration of war was a quiet, almost elegant act of cruelty. I had this album, a thick, leather-bound book with gold leaf lettering on the cover. It was filled with pictures of my dad, me on his shoulders at the city zoo, both of us covered head to toe in flour after a disastrous attempt to bake a birthday cake. Our last fishing trip where he looked so proud of the tiny sunfish I'd caught. It was my most sacred object. One afternoon, I came downstairs to find it lying open on the living room floor. A dark, sticky puddle of grape soda was soaking through the pages, its sickly sweet smell rising in the air. My father's smiling face was bleeding into a purple, unrecognizable smear. Jessica was standing a few feet away, inspecting a chipped nail with intense focus. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she finally glanced over. My hand must have slipped. I snatched up the ruined album, my hands shaking, and ran to my mother. She was in the kitchen, carefully arranging a bouquet of expensive-looking lilies Mark had brought home. She glanced from the dripping, ruined album to my tear-streaked face, and a long, weary sigh escaped her lips. It was the sound of profound inconvenience. "Don't make a scene, Adriana," she said, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. "It was an accident. Things can be replaced. Just clean it up." That was the moment I understood the full extent of my loss. My mother hadn't just moved on. She had defected. She had chosen this new, polished life. And I was a messy, inconvenient relic of the old one. In her eyes, a book of memories was just a thing that could be replaced. And my pain was just a scene to be avoided. That night, alone in my new, smaller room, I carefully peeled the few undamaged photos from the sticky prot. Warped pages. There was only one that was truly pristine. A small, square snapshot from that final fishing trip. My dad was holding up my tiny, flopping sunfish. His face crinkled in a huge grin, and I was next to him, beaming with a gap-toothed smile that radiated pure joy. I took that precious photograph and slipped it between pages 112 and 113 of a worn copy of Carl Sagan's Cosmos, a book he had given me for my birthday. I hid it on my shelf. A tiny, secret piece of my foundation. A sanctuary they couldn't breach. Life settled into a new Our Liebel Daughters. Cold rhythm. Dinners became a masterclass in tension, presided over by Mark at the head of the table. He announced one evening, after taking a long, deliberate sip of his wine, that as a man with extensive financial experience, it was only prudent that he take over the management of the family's assets to ensure our long-term security. That includes he added, his eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second. The educational trust David set up for Adriana. He said it with the same tone he might use to discuss a stock portfolio. It was $100,000. My father's legacy. My launchpad. I stared at my mother, my eyes screaming a silent plea across the table. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, her gaze firmly fixed on the chicken on her plate. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, pooled in my stomach. The food in my mouth turned to cardboard. I was no longer a daughter. I was an asset to be managed. A line item on a spreadsheet. My erasure was a gradual process, executed with 1,000 small cuts. They didn't hit me. They didn't scream at me. They simply made me invisible. When I won first place at the state science fair for a complex project on renewable energy systems, an achievement that would have made my dad take me out for celebratory ice cream, no matter the time of day, Mark gave me a single, dismissive nod over the top of his Wall Street Journal. 2 weeks later, Jessica graduated from high school. The backyard was transformed for her party with catered food, a mountain of gifts, and strings of festive lights that made the whole house glow. My role for the evening was to circulate with a tray of miniature quiches, smiling politely as their friends looked right through me or handed me their empty glasses without making eye contact. I was a ghost at a lavish party thrown in the ruins of my old life. The final, shattering blow, the one that destroyed any lingering hope I had, came late one night when I was 16. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with college applications and the ever-present anxiety of my home life. I crept downstairs for a glass of water and heard their hushed, urgent voices from the living room. I froze at the bottom of the stairs, hidden in the deep shadows. I'm telling you, Eleanor, it was a sure thing, Mark was saying, his voice a low growl of annoyance. The land deal in Westlake went south. The zoning board killed it. The money's gone. All of it, my mother whispered. Her voice was thin, brittle with a fear that I knew, with sickening certainty, was not for me. The money David left for Adriana, all of it. Most of it, he corrected her, his tone casual, as if discussing a minor loss in the stock market. I took care of it. Used what was left for the down payment on Jessica's new BMW. She needs something reliable for getting to campus in the fall. We have to take care of our own. Eleanor, you know that. The glass slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor, the sound exploding into the silence. They knew I was there. For the first time, I didn't care about making a scene. I walked into the living room, my heart hammering against my ribs, my whole body trembling with a rage so cold and pure, it felt like ice in my veins. You spent my college fund, I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the room like a razor. Mark glared at me, his face a mask of indignation at being challenged, but my eyes were locked on my mother. I willed her to look at me, to face me, to acknowledge the magnitude of this betrayal. She wouldn't. Her eyes darted around the room, landing on a lamp, a bookshelf, anywhere but my face. Adriana, she finally said, her voice hollow and distant. Money can be borrowed. Family can't. You have to understand our situation. But I did understand. In that one devastating moment, I understood everything with a clarity that felt like a physical blow. I wasn't family. Not anymore. I was the situation. I was the obstacle they had taken care of. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply turned and walked back up the stairs. The tears felt like a luxury I couldn't afford, a weakness I could no longer permit myself. I went to my room, closed the door, and sat in the suffocating dark for hours. The next day after school, I walked to the public library. I sat at a cold, sticky computer terminal, the fluorescent lights above humming a dreary tune. I took a deep breath, and with fingers that felt steady and sure, I typed my new reality into the search bar: full scholarships for disadvantaged students. Page after page of financial aid forms, essay prompt, and deadlines filled the screen. It was a daunting, overwhelming mountain to climb. But as I sat there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the library and the smell of old paper, a strange and unfamiliar calm settled over me. They had taken my father. They had taken my home. They had taken my inheritance. But they couldn't take my mind. They had destroyed my father's foundation. But he had taught me how to build, and I would build a new one. All by myself. Brick by painful, solitary brick. I had to. Because I finally understood, with the absolute and terrifying certainty of a survivor, that I was completely, utterly, and finally on my own. Those last 2 years of high school became a blur of calculated survival. Every action I took was a quiet rebellion. A step away from the cold, silent house on Elm Street and a step toward an unknown future. I became a machine powered by caffeine and sheer force of will. I took every advanced placement class I could handle, turning the school library into my real home. The librarians knew me by name, often leaving a cup of tea on my table as they were closing up for the night. After school, I didn't go home. I went to my part-time job at a greasy spoon diner downtown, where I'd spend 4 hours smelling of fried onions and coffee, smiling at customers until my cheeks ached. Every dollar, every crumpled $5 bill stuffed into my tip jar, was a brick in my new foundation. It was freedom, in small, hard-earned increments. The day I graduated, the sun was bright and unforgiving. I sat on a folding chair on the football field, a sea of navy blue caps and gowns around me. I could hear the joyous shouts of families in the bleachers, see the bright flashes of cameras. I was the valedictorian. When they called my name, I walked to the podium and delivered a speech about building your own future, about the power of resilience. The words felt true and hollow at the same time. I scanned the crowd. A foolish, persistent part of me hoping to see a familiar face. There was none. No mother. No Mark. No Jessica. Just an empty space where my family was supposed to be. I clutched my diploma. The smooth paper, a testament to a victory no one but me would celebrate. That afternoon, I packed a single, worn duffel bag with my few clothes, my textbooks, and the worn copy of Cosmos with my father's picture tucked safely inside. I walked out of that house for the last time without a single goodbye. My escape vehicle was a 1998 Honda Civic. A rattling, a faded green car I'd bought for $900 from one of the cooks at the diner. The engine coughed to life with a reluctant roar. As I pulled away from the curb, I took one last look in the rearview mirror. The house looked exactly the same, placid and perfect from the outside. No one would ever know the war I had just survived within its walls. I drove west, toward the promise of a scholarship at Northwood University in California. With the roar of the engine drowning out the silence I was leaving behind, the first years of college were a brutal grind. I was no longer just building a foundation. I was fighting a daily war against exhaustion and poverty. I had a full scholarship that covered tuition, but nothing else. I worked 2 jobs. From 6 to 10 in the morning, I was a waitress at another diner. This one smelling of burnt toast and desperation. From 6 to midnight, I was a work-study student in the campus library, shelving books and wiping down terminals. The scent of old paper and disinfectant clinging to my clothes. I lived in a tiny, run-down apartment off campus with a roommate I barely saw. My diet consisted primarily of instant ramen, peanut butter sandwiches, and whatever leftover food I could sneak from the diner. Hunger was a constant, dull ache in my stomach. Sleep was a luxury I rarely afforded myself. I was a ghost haunting the edges of a vibrant campus life, always on the outside looking in. I remember one Thanksgiving, during my sophomore year, I was walking home from a long shift at the library, the night air crisp and cold. Through the brightly lit window of a house, I saw a family gathered around a dining table. They were laughing, passing platters of food. A scene of such warmth and belonging it felt like a punch to the gut. I stood there in the cold, watching them, a lonely ghost in the dark. And the ache of what I'd lost was so sharp, so profound. It almost brought me to my knees. The turning point came in the most unexpected of places, a notoriously difficult advanced programming class. I was struggling with a complex algorithm, my brain foggy from lack of sleep. I'd been staring at the same lines of code for hours, getting nowhere. "You're missing a semicolon on line 72. A sharp voice said from beside me. I looked up. A girl with bright purple hair, a constellation of piercings on her ears, and the most intelligent eyes I'd ever seen was looking at my screen. Her name was Chloe. She was a legend in the computer science department, a coding prodigy who treated complex problems like fun puzzles. "And your loop is inefficient?" she added, pulling up a chair without asking. "You're making the processor do twice the work. There's a more elegant way." That was how our friendship started. Not with small talk, but with code. Chloe was the first person in years who didn't look at me with pity or indifference. She saw my exhaustion. Yes, but she also saw my mind, my drive. She saw the elegance in the solutions I came up with when I wasn't half asleep. One Friday, after we'd spent 8 straight hours in a study room, wrestling with a project, she took one look at my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes and said, "You look like death. You're coming home with me for the weekend. My mom's making lasagna. It's not a request." Walking into Chloe's house was like stepping into another dimension. It was loud, chaotic, and filled with the incredible smell of garlic and tomatoes. Her parents enveloped me in hugs before I even learned their names. Her little brother showed me his Lego creations. For the first time in years, I sat at a dinner table where people talked and laughed and argued about movies. It was messy and real, and so full of love it felt overwhelming. After dinner, Chloe's mom, a warm, kind woman named Maria, found me staring at a wall of family photos. She put a hand on my shoulder. "You're a good friend to Chloe," she said softly. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world. Honey, you can set it down here for a little while." And for the first time since my father died, I cried. Not cute. Lonely tears in my pillow. But huge, racking sobs. Maria just held me, patting my back, letting me release years of pent-up grief and loneliness and fear into the safety of her arms. That weekend, I didn't just eat good food, I rediscovered what it felt like to be cared for. I found my first piece of a new family. A family I was choosing for myself. The idea that would change my life was born, like most things in my college years, from sheer desperation. I was juggling 2 jobs, a full course load, and my duties as a teaching assistant. My life was a chaotic mess of sticky notes, calendar alerts, and handwritten to-do lists. One night, buried under a mountain of conflicting deadlines, I decided to build the tool I needed. I wrote a simple, elegant program to sync my work schedules, class assignments, and study blocks into one clean, intuitive interface. It was just for me. A way to impose order on my own chaos. I showed it to Chloe. She stared at the screen for a long time. Her expression unreadable. Then she looked at me. Her eyes wide. Addie, she said slowly, this isn't just a tool. This is a product. Every overwhelmed student and freelancer on the planet needs this. After we graduated, I was offered a stable, well-paying job at a major tech firm in Silicon Valley. It was everything I should have wanted: security, a good salary, benefits. It was the safe choice. I turned it down. Instead, Chloe and I pooled our meager savings, rented a tiny, cramped studio apartment where the kitchen, bedroom, and office were all within arm's reach, and poured every waking hour into turning my personal project into a real company. We called it SyncUp. Those first few years were a different kind of grind. We lived on instant ramen and coffee, working 18-hour days fueled by passion and the terrifying knowledge that we had no safety net. We pitched our idea to dozens of investors. We faced a parade of polite dismissals and condescending advice from men in expensive suits who couldn't see the potential in two young women with a dream. But we kept refining, kept coding, kept believing. The breakthrough came on a gray, drizzly afternoon. We were in a sleek, intimidating boardroom, pitching to a veteran venture capitalist named Mr. Harrison. He was older, with a calm, steady presence. He listened to our entire pitch without interruption, his eyes never leaving mine. When I was done, he didn't ask about our profit margins or our marketing strategy. He asked about our story. At the end of the meeting, he leaned back in his chair. I've seen hundreds of apps that do something similar, he said, his voice thoughtful. But I've rarely seen founders with your level of grit. I'm not just investing in the code. I believe in you. He wrote us a check for $50,000. It felt heavier and more valuable than all the gold in the world. It wasn't just money, it was validation. It was the first time a powerful person had looked at me and said, "You are worth this risk." With that investment, SyncUp exploded. The app found its audience, and our user base grew exponentially. We were finally able to move out of the tiny studio and into a real office. We hired our first employees. We were featured in tech magazines. The Cinderella story of Silicon Valley. The success was dizzying, exhilarating, and incomplete. I had achieved everything I had set out to do. I had financial security. I had a successful company. But late at night, in the quiet of my new, spacious apartment, the ghost of that lonely girl from Ohio would sometimes reappear. I realized that building a successful life wasn't the same as healing one. So, I took the biggest step of all. I found a therapist, a compassionate woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. In her quiet, safe office, I began the slow, painful work of unpacking the trauma I had locked away for so long. I learned that my relentless drive was both a strength and a defense mechanism. I learned to set boundaries. I learned that I was worthy of love and respect, not because of what I had built, but simply because of who I was. It was the hardest work I'd ever done. 5 years after we sold SyncUp in a multi-million-dollar acquisition, my life was unrecognizable. I was still the CEO. But now I had a team I trusted. I had bought a house. A beautiful, modern home perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I had established the David Taylor Foundation in my father's honor, a nonprofit dedicated to funding scholarships for students from low-income backgrounds. I had turned my pain into a purpose. I was sitting in my home office one afternoon, the ocean breeze drifting through the open window, reviewing a new batch of scholarship applications. My phone buzzed on the desk with a notification. It was from LinkedIn. My heart stopped. Jessica Miller viewed your profile. Miller. Her married name. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. 12 years of absolute silence. And now this? It was a digital ghost. A single line of text that ripped open a door to the past I had fought so hard to seal shut. That single line of text on my phone screen felt less like a notification and more like a crack appearing in the wall of a fortress I had spent 12 years building. Jessica Miller viewed your profile. It was a digital fingerprint left at the scene of my new life, a sign that the ghosts of my past had learned how to use the internet. For a moment, the vast, sunlit office with its panoramic ocean view seemed to shrink. The walls closing in, a cold dread, a feeling I hadn't truly experienced in years, coiled in my stomach. I closed the laptop. I told myself it was nothing. A curiosity. A stray click in the lonely hours of the night. But I knew better. They had never been the curious type. Unless that curiosity served a purpose. For a week, I lived with that low-grade hum of anxiety beneath the surface of my carefully constructed peace. Every unexpected email, every buzz of my phone, sent a jolt through my system. I found myself double-checking the locks on my doors at night. A habit I'd long since abandoned. I was waiting. I didn't know for what. Exactly. But the feeling was undeniable. A storm was gathering just over the horizon, and that single notification had been the first distant flicker of lightning. Then, the following Tuesday, the storm made landfall. It was a beautiful afternoon. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the sound of the waves crashing against the cliffs below was a steady, rhythmic heartbeat. I was in my living room, curled on the sofa with a cup of tea, reading a book. The doorbell echoed through the house. A clear, three-note chime that was usually reserved for package deliveries or Chloe dropping by unannounced. But this time, the sound felt different. It felt like a verdict. A summons. I put my book down, my own heartbeat suddenly louder than the ocean. I walked through the cool, marble entryway, my bare feet silent on the stone. I took a deep, steadying breath. A technique Dr. Sharma had taught me, and pulled open the heavy oak door. And there they were. Time seemed to warp and bend. For a split second, they looked like strangers. Older, worn down by a life that had clearly not been as kind to them as they'd hoped. Mark's confident posture had been replaced by a slight slump in his shoulders. His face puffier and etched with lines of stress. My mother, Eleanor, looked faded. A watercolor version of the woman I remembered. Her hair thinner, and her eyes carrying a familiar, haunted weariness. And Jessica. She was visibly, heavily pregnant. Her hands resting protectively on her swollen belly. Her face, which I remembered as a mask of smug superiority, was now pale and strained. They were standing on the welcome mat of a life they had done everything in their power to prevent me from having. The silence stretched. In thick and heavy with 12 years of unspoken history. They stared at me. Then past me. Their eyes widening as they took in the soaring ceilings, the gleaming floors, the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me. It was a look of pure, unadulterated shock, mingled with something else, resentment. It was the look of people realizing they had backed the wrong horse. I was the one who broke the silence. My voice, when it came, was calmer than I felt. It was the voice I used in boardrooms, steady and controlled. Please, come in. I stepped back, holding the door open. They hesitated for a moment, as if crossing the threshold was a monumental act, then shuffled inside. I watched them, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. They looked so small, so out of place amidst the clean lines and open spaces of my home. I led them into the living room, the same room where I had been peacefully reading just minutes before. They perched awkwardly on the edge of my white leather sofa, looking like crows that had mistakenly landed in a swan's nest. There was a painful stretch of small talk. They commented on the view, the house. I offered them something to drink. They all asked for water. The whole exchange was stilted, a poorly rehearsed play where everyone had forgotten their lines. Finally, after I had returned with glasses of water, they didn't seem to want. Jessica began the performance I now realized they had come here to give. Her eyes filled with well-rehearsed tears. A single, perfect tear traced a path down her cheek. Adriana, she began, her voice trembling slightly. It's so good to see you. You look amazing. She gestured around the room. You've done so well. We're so proud. The word proud hung in the air. Assur. Discordant note. I remained silent, letting her continue. She told me about her husband, Tyler, a name I'd only seen on her LinkedIn profile. She talked about his startup, a tech venture that was, she said, on the verge of greatness but was currently struggling with funding. She talked about the baby, a girl, and how they wanted to give her the world. But the timing was just so difficult. It was a masterfully woven tale of woe. Then Mark, ever the closer, stepped in. He leaned forward, placing his elbows on his knees, adopting the patronizing tone I remembered so well. Adriana, he said, as if explaining something to a child. What Jessica is trying to say is that we're in a bit of a tight spot. This startup of Tyler's FU. It's a game changer. But you know how it is. Sometimes you just need a little bridge financing to get to the next level. We need a family investment. I met his gaze. My expression unreadable. A family investment. I repeated, my voice flat. Exactly, he said, a relieved smile spreading across his face. He thought he had me. We need $150,000. Just a small loan. Really? Considering all this? He waved a dismissive hand at my home. At my life. You owe us that much. For family. There it was. The audacity. The sheer, breathtaking entitlement. 12 years of silence. Of abandonment. Of my own private hell. And they had the gall to show up and tell me what I owed them. Something inside me. A cold, hard knot of anger that had been dormant for years. Finally snapped. But my face remained a mask of calm. I didn't say anything. I simply stood up. My movements slow and deliberate. I walked across the room to a beautiful, handcrafted wooden credenza that stood against the far wall. Their eyes followed me. Their expressions a mixture of confusion and greedy anticipation. I opened one of the doors, tucked in the back, behind a stack of photo albums from my new life pictures of Chloe, of my travels, of my team was a simple, battered shoebox. I took it out and walked back to the coffee table. I placed it on the glass surface with a soft, definitive thud. It was the box where I had kept every single piece of my past. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled together, was a thick stack of letters and cards. I reached in and pulled them out, spreading them across the table like a losing hand in a game of poker. There were dozens of them. Birthday cards with cheerful cartoon characters on the front. Christmas cards with snowy landscapes. Simple, handwritten notes just to say hello. And on every single one, stamped in angry red ink, were the words, "Return to sender. Address unknown." For the first 5 years after I left, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a decade of pain, I sent these. Every birthday. Every Christmas. I wanted you to know I was okay. I wanted to know if you were okay. I pushed one of the cards toward my mother. This is what I got back. Every single time. I then turned my gaze fully on Eleanor. She flinched, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. I emailed you. Mom. I continued, my voice still level, still controlled. Dozens of times, not asking for anything, just asking how you were, wanting to hear your voice. Why did you never reply? She stammered, her hands fluttering in her lap like wounded birds. Mark, he thought it was for the best. He said you needed your space, that you were angry, that we should let you live your life. I let out a short, bitter laugh. It was a sound devoid of any humor. My space. I repeated. I looked from her face to Mark's smug, defensive expression. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, hard and sharp. The lie she had told herself for 12 years. No. Mom, I said. And the words came out like chips of ice. Let's be honest. For the first time in over a decade, you didn't give me space. You chose him. You chose his comfort over your daughter's pain. You chose the easy lie over the difficult truth. You chose silence, just like you did when he spent my college fund. The accusation landed in the center of the room and detonated. Jessica gasped. My mother looked like I had struck her. And Mark's face began to purple with a rage he could no longer contain. You ungrateful little brat, he sputtered, finally dropping the charming facade. A vein throbbed in his temple. After everything we did for you, we gave you a roof over your head. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I met his rage with a calm that was far more powerful. What did you do? Mark, I asked, my voice dangerously soft. What? Exactly. Did you do? Besides, spend a child's inheritance and teach my mother how to abandon her own daughter? He was on his feet now, his fists clenched. But he was powerless here. This was my house. My world. It had no leverage. Not control. I turned my attention back to the three of them. A judge delivering a long overdue sentence. The answer is no. I said clearly. I will not give you $150,000. I will not give you $1. That money doesn't exist for you anymore. You spent it. Remember. I let that sink in, watching the hope drain from their faces, replaced by raw, ugly desperation. Jessica started to sob. Not the delicate, single tear from before, but a messy, panicked cry. I looked at her, at the life growing inside her, and a part of me, the part that my father had built, refused to be as cruel as they had been. But I will not let a child pay for the mistakes of its grandparents. I said, my tone shifting from judgment to instruction. I looked at Jessica. Your husband can send me his business plan. I will not invest. But I will connect him with a legitimate business mentor who can tell him why he's failing. It will be the most valuable help he's ever received. Then I looked at my mother. And you, I said, my voice softening just a fraction. If you ever truly want to have a relationship with me, it will start with you going to therapy. Alone. You have to figure out who you are without a man telling you what to think and what to feel. Those are my terms. They are not negotiable. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a world completely upended. It was Mark who broke it. A string of curses erupted from his mouth. Vile and impotent. He glared at me one last time. His eyes filled with a hatred that was startling in its intensity. He saw my calm, saw that he had lost, completely and utterly. And he turned on his heel. He stormed across the marble floor, yanked open the heavy oak door, and slammed it shut behind him. The sound was like a gunshot. The entire house seemed to shudder from the impact. And in the echoing silence, I was left with my mother and my stepsister, two broken women sitting amidst the wreckage of their own making. Jessica was openly weeping now, her body shaking. And my mother just sat there, staring at the returned letters on the table, her face a pale, unreadable mask. For the first time in 12 years, there was no one left for her to hide behind. The slam of the heavy oak door was a sound of absolute finality. It echoed through the marble entryway, a sonic boom that seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the room. In the ringing silence that followed, there were only three sounds: the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves against the cliffs, the frantic, gulping sobs of my stepsister, and the frantic, unsteady thumping of my own heart. The storm had passed, leaving behind the wreckage. Jessica was a collapsed heap on the expensive white sofa, her body shaking with messy. Desperate cries. My mother, Eleanor, was a statue carved from regret. She sat perfectly still, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. Her gaze was fixed on the scattered pile of returned letters on the coffee table, as if she could somehow, through sheer force of will, reverse time and unsend them. Unlive the choices that had brought her to this moment. I stood there, in the center of the room, feeling a strange and profound emptiness. It wasn't the fiery satisfaction of victory I had sometimes imagined. It wasn't a surge of triumphant glee. It was the quiet, hollow emptiness of a space that had finally been cleared of debris. The anger, the resentment, the deep, aching pain that had been my constant companions for 12 years, they were gone. And in their place, there was just stillness. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, Jessica's sobs subsided into hiccuping gasps. My mother slowly, deliberately, reached out and gathered the returned letters, stacking them into a neat, shameful pile. She didn't look at me. I'm sorry, she whispered to the letters, her voice a dry, cracking rustle. It was an inadequate word for a betrayal of that magnitude, but it was the only one she had. You should go, I said, and my voice was devoid of malice. It was simply a statement of fact. This performance was over. Eleanor nodded. A small, yarky movement. She helped a dazed and weeping Jessica to her feet, and together, they shuffled toward the door like two defeated soldiers leaving a battlefield. My mother paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorknob, and for a fleeting second, she turned and met my eyes. In them, I didn't see the woman who had abandoned me. I saw a stranger. A frightened, lost person I barely knew. Then she was gone, closing the door softly behind her. A stark contrast to Mark's violent exit. And then, I was alone. The silence that descended now was different. It was clean. It was mine. I walked through the quiet house, my bare feet cool on the stone, and ended up in my office. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long golden shafts of light across the room. I stood there for a long time, just breathing, in and out. The simple, mechanical act of being alive. I had survived. My eyes fell on the bookshelf, on the worn and familiar spine of Carl Sagan's Cosmos. I pulled it from the shelf, its pages soft and familiar in my hands. I opened it to the middle, and there he was, the small, square photograph of my father and me on our last fishing trip. His huge, proud grin, my own gap-toothed, joyful smile. I traced the outline of his face with my fingertip. The paper was smooth, cool to the touch. I didn't cry. I just looked at his face. The face of the man who had taught me to build a strong foundation. I did it. Dad, I thought. The words a silent promise I had finally fulfilled. I aimed for the stars, and my foundation held. A week went by. It was a quiet week of work, of walks on the beach, of reconnecting with the peaceful rhythm of my life. I didn't know if I would ever hear from them again, and a part of me was content with that. Then, one evening, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but some instinct made me answer. Hello. There was a hesitant pause on the other end. Just the sound of someone breathing. Adriana, the voice said. It was my mother. It was thin, fragile. A voice I hadn't heard in my ear in over a decade. Yes, I said, my own voice neutral. I just wanted to, I started, she stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. The therapy, I had my first session today. It was hard. I didn't know what to say. Okay. I finally managed. And Tyler, she continued. Jessica's husband. He's going to email you his business plan. He was angry at first, but Jessica convinced him. She told him it was the only way forward. Okay, I said again. We sat in silence for another long, awkward moment. I could hear her taking a shaky breath. That's all, she said quietly. I just thought you should know. And then she hung up. The next morning, an email from a Tyler Miller was in my inbox. The business plan was attached. It was, as I had suspected, a mess. It was a jumble of tech buzzwords and vague projections, with no clear revenue model and a fundamental misunderstanding of the target market. The old me, the wounded, angry me, might have deleted it. The new me, the CEO, saw it as a problem to be solved. I spent an hour dissecting it, marking it up with red ink, writing blunt, direct, but constructive feedback in the margins. I pointed out the flaws, questioned the assumptions, and suggested a complete pivot in his strategy. At the end, I added the contact information for a retired tech executive I knew, a brilliant but notoriously tough mentor. I wrote a single line. If you are serious about this, call him. He will not waste your time. And you should not waste his. I hit send and didn't think about it again. A few months passed. My mother called every week. The conversations were still stilted. But they were slowly becoming less about the gaping wound of the past and more about the tentative present. She told me about her therapy sessions. She talked, for the first time, about her grief after my father died. About the fear and loneliness that had made her so vulnerable to a man like Mark. She never asked for forgiveness. Instead, she was simply doing the work. She was building her own foundation, separate from him, for the first time in her adult life. Then, one spring morning, I received a text from her. It was a single photo, a tiny, wrinkled, red-faced baby wrapped in a pink hospital blanket. The caption read, Lily Rose Miller, 7 pounds, 2 ounces. Jessica and the baby are doing well. I stared at the picture of my new niece. I felt a strange stirring of emotion. Something distant and complex that I couldn't quite name. I wasn't suddenly filled with a familial warmth. The damage of the past ran too deep for that. But I also felt no animosity. This tiny, innocent person had nothing to do with the sins of her family. I went online and ordered a beautiful, handcrafted mobile of swirling planets and stars to be sent to their address, along with a simple card that just said, "Congratulations on the arrival of Lily, Adriana." It was a gesture, an acknowledgement. It was enough. For now, the David Taylor Foundation held its inaugural fundraising gala that fall. It was the culmination of everything I had worked for. The most public declaration of my father's legacy and my own purpose. The ballroom was stunning, filled with elegantly dressed donors, community leaders, and the bright, hopeful faces of our first class of scholarship recipients. I stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, the lights warm on my face. I spoke about my father, about his belief in the power of a strong foundation. I shared a sanitized version of my own story. Not the raw, painful details, but the essence of it. I spoke of the challenges that young, bright minds face when they lack resources, when the world seems determined to hold them back. I talked about the importance of giving someone a chance, an opportunity, a single open door in a hallway of closed ones. As I was wrapping up my speech, my eyes scanned the back of the room, and I saw her. My mother was standing near the back wall, partially hidden by a pillar. She was dressed simply, looking entirely out of place amidst the glitz and glamour, and she was crying. But these were not the tears of grief or shame I had seen before. Her face was lifted toward me, and through her tears, she was smiling. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated pride. After the applause had died down and people were mingling, she made her way through the crowd toward me. She looked different. The weary tension around her eyes had softened. She looked lighter. She stopped in front of me, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. "That was a beautiful speech, Addie," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Your father, he would have been so proud of you." I just nodded, unable to speak. "I'm sorry," she said. And this time, the words had weight. They had meaning. I'm sorry for all of it. For not being strong enough. For letting my fear make me cruel. Mark didn't make me do anything. I chose to be weak. That's on me. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it. I looked into my mother's eyes, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the woman she used to be. The strong, vibrant woman who had laughed in our sunny backyard. "I know, Mom," I said softly. It's a start. My life now has a rhythm of its own making. Some mornings, I get a text from Jessica. It's usually a picture of Lily smiling in her high chair, taking her first wobbly steps. The messages are short, tentative, but they are a thread of connection. A fragile bridge being built over a chasm of hurt. Tyler's startup, after a complete overhaul guided by my mentor, actually secured a round of seed funding. He's working harder than he ever has in his life. My mother and I still talk every week. The calls are less awkward now. Sometimes, we even laugh. She is finding her own voice. I spend most of my days now working with the foundation, interviewing brilliant, driven students who remind me so much of that desperate girl in the library all those years ago. I am giving them the one thing I never had: the knowledge that someone believes in them. This evening, I'm sitting on my deck, a glass of wine in my hand, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The cool ocean breeze feels clean and fresh against my skin. The silence of my home isn't empty, it's peaceful. It's a quiet earned, not given. I am not a victim of my past. I am not the product of their choices. I am the architect of this life, of this peace. Every single brick, every beam. Elate myself. My foundation is strong. And from here, I can see the stars.